eve of the inauguration. The podium at the Capitol, ready for a new president. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting tonight from our inauguration headquarters here in Washington. Good evening. President-elect George Bush today talked up some of what he will and won't do after he starts in the Oval Office tomorrow. He said he won't be inclined to have any quick summit with Mikhail Gorbachev. He said he won't rush into a new round of nuclear arms control negotiations with the Soviets. Mr. Bush appeared to disagree with President Reagan's recent suggestion that the United States reconsider the treaty to turn over control of the Panama Canal, finally and completely, to Panama, and he would only hint at what's in his inaugural speech tomorrow, calling it a broad appeal to the American people. There was heavy prepping here in the nation's capital. Lots of last-minute practicing for the carefully orchestrated events for the cameras, including inaugural stand-ins for tomorrow's main event. The results of a new CBS News New York Times poll out tonight indicate the high hopes of the American people as George Bush takes office. 68% say they are optimistic about his presidency. But on the hard reality of the most serious problems facing the nation, the people we polled said 4-1 they don't expect he'll be able to balance the federal budget. And perhaps one of the most telling results, 73% said they think George Bush will break his promise and ask for higher taxes. George Bush repeatedly has promised that he will not raise taxes. His budget director-to-be, Richard Darman, has tried to pass the word quietly that, well, some of what most people might call taxes may very well be raised, but that neither he nor Mr. Bush wants to call them new taxes. What's going on here? Correspondent Deborah Potter listened closely for possible additional clues as Darman went through confirmation hearings on Capitol Hill today.
There was no ducking the issue on Capitol Hill today for incoming Budget Director Richard Darman.
The duck test is, if it quacks, it's a tax.
Darman insisted that George Bush won't try to wiggle out of his campaign promise not to raise taxes, but he left a crack in the door.
There are times when it may be responsible to make a recommendation that goes against a campaign.
Could that be?
It took a lot of pressure from the senators to pin Darman down, but he finally said it would take a war or a severe economic crisis to get him to recommend higher taxes. Still, there was skepticism that the president-elect will be able to keep his promise.
Read my lips may be a great dialogue for a movie, but I have serious doubts as to whether it can lead to a productive dialogue.
But Darman said Mr. Bush really means it, and he won't play any name games to disguise new taxes.
If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. That is the test that it seems to me is to be applied with respect to taxes. If ordinary people think that what we're talking about is a tax increase, it's a tax increase.
Darman's new definition cleared up an earlier impression that he would consider a higher user fee on gasoline, taxes on fringe benefits, and limits on the mortgage interest deduction. Today, he said, they are taxes, and they're off the table. That left committee members wondering how the new president would pay for all his promises, not to mention two expensive new problems that have to be addressed: the savings and loan crisis with a tab of up to $50 billion, and nuclear cleanup costing another $50 billion. Darman had no specific answers today, but he did promise that a Bush budget will be set up here by the middle of next month, so the real wrangling can begin. Deborah Potter, CBS News on Capitol Hill.
The Senate Foreign Relations Committee voted 19-0 today for George Bush's close friend and key player Jim Baker to be the new United States Secretary of State. Full Senate confirmation is expected next week. During 2 days of hearings, Baker expressed concern about Central America, but he stressed there will be no sharp turns in overall U.S. foreign policy. And wherever possible, he said, there'll be bipartisan cooperation with Congress. For his part, George Bush showed up at the D.C. Armory before a group of 9,000 high schoolers, then backed off from public view for much of the day. Vice President-elect Dan Quayle, who refused during the campaign to release his own school records, told the same high schoolers he wishes now he had been a better student.
And quite frankly, as one looks back in life, I'll be the first to admit I wish I had taken education more seriously.
Later, Quayle was the main event at a reception featuring the day's longest line. 21,000 names on that guest list. And at a salute to Barbara Bush at the Kennedy Center, the First Lady-in-Waiting herself signaled changing times and down-to-earth style.
Please notice the hair, the makeup, designer clothes. I want you to watch me all week. And remember, you may never see it again.
Far from all the pageantry of the gala, a different kind of history was made today in Chicago. Federal officials said they've turned up evidence of massive fraud on the world's largest commodities exchanges. One source said investors lost, and I quote, a ton of money in what shapes up as another breach of faith on the nation's financial markets. Gary Reeves has our report.
On Chicago's commodity and futures exchanges, where million-dollar deals are made with a wave of a hand, traders were shocked today with news that undercover FBI agents posed as workers here for 2 years, uncovering what could be the biggest financial scam since the Wall Street insider trading scandal.
There's a lot of surprise, and it doesn't reflect very well upon the Chicago exchanges.
Wherever there is greed, there is going to be something happening illegal.
What happened, according to Justice Department sources, is that brokers from several unnamed investment firms systematically cheated their clients of millions of dollars. They allegedly used a version of the so-called bucket trade, where brokers would sell futures for one price, but tell customers they sold for less, allowing the brokers to pocket the difference. The trading houses didn't know about the probe, but now they are cooperating.
It's in our interest to make sure that any type of wrongdoing occurring in our pits is cleaned up as quickly and as clearly and completely as possible.
Many claim the system itself is flawed because, unlike the stock exchanges, the commodity exchanges allow brokers to trade for themselves and their clients at the same time.
I think that some of the major participants who have been involved, seeing all the money go by, decided to take some for themselves.
Customers who have lost money on futures have flooded the local FBI office with calls trying to find out if their brokers are among the 50 to 100 involved in the probe. But so far, officials have had no comment.
It is difficult to tell how far this investigation will go. One high Justice Department source compared it to a bucket of oatmeal. He says you can't see in there yet, but things should become clearer as the indictments are released, possibly as early as next month. Gary Reeves, CBS News, Chicago.
The Labor Department said today that inflation last year stood at 4.4%, the same as in 1987. For the year, the drought pushed food prices up 5.2%, highest since 1980. Energy costs rose only slightly, but medical costs at 6.9% once again climbed higher than the general inflation rate. Still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, correspondent Tom Fenton on the Soviet announcement that it will pull some short-range nuclear missiles out of Eastern Europe, and correspondent Mark Phillips on the big money social follies of this inauguration of the 41st president. There was a dramatic announcement in Vienna today. It came from the Soviet foreign minister on the final day of the conference about European security and human rights. And as Tom Fenton reports from London, it may throw a wrench into some of President-elect Bush's defense plans.
Declaring that the Iron Curtain is crumbling, Foreign Minister Shevardnadze announced today the Soviet Union will remove some of its short-range nuclear missiles from Eastern Europe. The unilateral decision was welcomed in Washington and Western Europe, but there's concern that it could complicate one of the most sensitive items on President-elect Bush's foreign policy agenda. The political fallout from the announcement may be greater than its military significance. The missiles belong to Army units the Soviets have already promised to withdraw.
I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it alters, it certainly doesn't alter the balance of nuclear weaponry on the two sides to any significant extent.
Shevardnadze revealed the details of his speech first to the West German foreign minister, whose government has been trying to put off a decision on new missiles. Shevardnadze is clearly aiming at the growing number of Germans who want their government to say no to nuclear weapons. The U.S. wants to replace 88 of these aging short-range nuclear missiles in West Germany with new missiles to counter the overwhelming Soviet advantage in tanks and troops. But the Germans are reluctant to accept any more American missiles, especially short-range weapons that can only fall on German territory.
One of the leading German defense spokespeople has mentioned the shorter the range, the deader the Germans, and that sums up their feeling.
The other major West European allies backed the American plan for new missiles, so the potential is there for a serious split within NATO. That thought may not have been far from Shevardnadze's mind today when he made the announcement. Tom Fenton, CBS News, London.
The Iron Curtain is crumbling, said Shevardnadze. For the fifth straight day, political protesters rallied in Prague, Czechoslovakia tonight, and police reacted with what are said to be their toughest tactics yet. Hundreds of police charged into the 2,000 protesters about half an hour after they assembled. More than a dozen protesters were said to be badly beaten, and at least 10 were detained. The rallies began last Sunday to commemorate a young man who committed suicide protesting the Soviet-led invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1969. Constitutional Affairs Minister Chris Yunus was named acting president of South Africa today, the day after President P.W. Botha suffered a stroke. CBS News New York Times poll indicates 51% of Americans would be willing to accept a federal tax increase of $100 a year just to wage the war on drugs, the addiction, trafficking, and violence that is destroying whole neighborhoods. One such neighborhood is not far from George Bush's own White House window. CBS News correspondent Eric Ingberg reports on the drug plague George Bush and we are up against.
When George Bush moves into the big house on Pennsylvania Avenue, he'll be in a rough neighborhood. Just blocks from the White House, drug pushers now operate brazenly. The city has become America's murder capital. Here, as elsewhere, most suspects arrested for all types of crime are drug users. Mr. Bush ran as the candidate who would stop drugs and fight crime. His prescriptions generally were simple.
Some people need to be taken off the streets and kept off the streets.
Colin Younger's view of the drug threat is from the trenches. As head of the D.C. Police Narcotics Branch, he has seen the deadly dynamic of a fast-moving crack epidemic. Teenagers turned into addicts, addicts turned into pushers, pushers turned into killers.
Yes, this is much more than a police problem. This is a societal problem. This is everybody's problem.
Montana Terrace Public Housing Project, well known to the police as an outdoor drug market. Here, the pusher with his expensive cars and clothes is the role model. Government efforts to teach the young about the dangers of addiction have not taken hold.
Look at the small kids around here. They're tiny kids, and they're out here watching this stuff, and they're seeing it. So somebody needs to start at the earliest age possible in school, and from there on up.
The new president will hear from experts that more must be spent on anti-drug education, that the problem cannot be solved just by busting pushers.
Oh, it probably takes anywhere from 5 to 8 seconds to recruit a replacement. There's a tremendous labor pool out there just waiting to make a tremendous amount of tax-free dollars.
Police want more economic warfare against dealers. They say that seizing their money, as many judges now permit, sends a stronger message than prison.
They would come out here and sell drugs and stack away a couple $1 million and go to jail for a couple of years and get out. And they got the money, they got the home, they got the cars. But now that we're taking it away, they have to think about it. What's going to happen when I get out?
The new president can expect to hear carping from local authorities who want the U.S. to deport Colombians, Jamaicans, and other foreigners caught dealing drugs here.
If you look at drug trafficking, it looks like a war directed against the United States by foreign nationals.
Mr. Bush will also hear calls for help from those who treat the addicts. They lack room for those who want to say no.
I'm a recovering addict myself. And if somebody said I was going to be on a waiting list for 2 months, I doubt very much if I'd be here today.
While the new CBS News New York Times poll shows most people doubt the new president can reduce drug trafficking much, the view from the front lines of the war on drugs is that progress will come, but it will cost heavily in money and time.
It's going to cost a lot of money, but I think it's going to be well worth it. Otherwise, we're going to lose the whole society here.
Eric Engberg, CBS News, Washington.
President Reagan had some parting actions and comments today. He again defended Oliver North and John Poindexter for the weapons for Iran, what happened to the money case, but said he would not give them any last-minute presidential pardons. President Reagan again denied his own secret arms sales to Iran amounted to any ransom attempt, any attempt to swap arms for hostages. judge here in Washington tonight temporarily, at least, blocked the Reagan administration from erasing everything in the so-called Prof computer system at the White House. The Prof computer system contained key evidence of Oliver North's White House basement operations, documents that North thought he had destroyed. White House lawyers now argue that what's left in the system are only personal notes. Lawyers for the American Civil Liberties Union say there may still be secret material on the weapons for Iran deal in the computer, that it may contain evidence of obstruction of justice, and that the Prof system should not be erased. Tomorrow, George Bush will take the oath of office and deliver his inaugural address. His first address as President of the United States, a chance to set his tone and his agenda and seek support for his goals. No doubt he is also mindful that an inaugural address is often used to take the measure of a president years later and as a milepost for measuring our own lives, the way we were and are. 20 years ago, the war raged in Vietnam and protesters battled at home when Richard Nixon took office.
We are caught in war wanting peace. We're torn by division wanting unity.
Ironically, of course, he is remembered for ripping the country apart with Watergate. Wounds Gerald Ford tried to heal.
Our long national nightmare is over. Our Constitution works.
Jimmy Carter's inauguration signaled a humble, informal presidency.
Your strength can compensate for my weakness, and your wisdom can help to minimize my mistakes.
But that humility contributed to an image of weakness. American hostages in Iran and soaring inflation helped drive Mr. Carter out.
These United States are confronted with an economic affliction of great proportions.
In his first term, Mr. Reagan reined in both inflation and unemployment, but he'd also vowed to reduce the deficit.
We must act today in order to preserve tomorrow.
But 4 years later, the deficit had more than doubled.
We've come to a turning point, a moment for hard decisions. If not us, who? And if not now, when?
For Mr. Bush, it will be back to the deficit drawing board. And he will probably hit on another inaugural theme, less dependence on government.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
Let us remember that America was built not by government, but by people. Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
And most incoming presidents cannot resist talking about dreams.
But as we chart our goals, we shall be lifted by our dreams.
I have no new dream to set forth today, but rather urge a fresh faith in the old dream.
One people, under God, dedicated to the dream of freedom that he has placed in the human heart, called upon now to pass that dream on to a waiting and a hopeful world. Thank you.
A strong speech can set the tone for a new administration. George Bush isn't talking about his speech today. The next inaugural oration waits for tomorrow. Amid the majesty and serious constitutional business of tomorrow's inauguration, there is also the business of Washington high society and high anxiety over what's hot and what's not, who's wealthy and who's not, and what the well-dressed will be wearing and doing. CBS News correspondent Mark Phillips has the hip, the hype, and the hoopla, Bush style.
Once again, Washington and Washington society are getting ready to inaugurate a president. Once again, fashions are changing to accommodate the new trendsetter-in-chief.
A little less radicchio and some more jalapeno.
In the kitchen, chefs are moving from Reagan, California casual to a Bush combo, New England Tex-Mex.
Well, we're sticking lobster into fajitas, which is it's a northeast meets southwest.
In the nightclubs, the humorists are mining presidential themes.
The Budweiser float displays 1,000 pints of light.
The jokes are easy. Sorting out the Bush style, Eastern old money, or Texas new is tougher.
Well, this is a historic American question. How do you behave in a dignified way without being uppity?
How to be dignified and in vogue without breaking the bank. One way, don't buy your gown, rent it.
It's a little bit long for you. What we could do is we could just tack up the back. Well, they want to look $1 million at a fraction of the cost.
Across the street, across what may be the great unseen class divide, cost is no object.
Is this a fox?
Yes.
This is $6,600.
Yet there are still decisions to be made.
Oh, do you have anything red, white, and blue? I wouldn't mind looking very patriotic.
The problem is that for a country that prides itself on a kind of studied informality, great social high society events like this one cause some uncertainty. Great social issues of our age are being grappled with here. Just how conspicuous should consumption be at a time like this?
5 days and 4 nights in the presidential suite. You get Cristal champagne and caviar every day.
The most expensive suite in town has been booked since the day after the election.
All for $15,000.
All to stand out from the rest at events that may not be all you expected.
Actually, what it is too many people in hot rooms pressing. Is he there? Is he there?
People in hot rooms who have paid good money to get there. $1,500 a plate at this dinner.
It's inconceivable that, for example, if you were invited to dinner with the Queen, as people are in England, that you would be asked to pay. Of course not. It's free, naturally. I mean, who would you pay the money to? Does she stand at the door with one of those credit card rollers?
It was the wisdom of the Founding Fathers that inaugurations take place only every 4 years. Politically, financially, socially, they may have been wise beyond their time. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
And that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting again from Washington. Tomorrow we'll have full live coverage of all the inaugural events. And tonight at 7 Central Time, CBS will broadcast the Presidential Inaugural Gala. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, Andy Rooney and Art Buchwald join us on the Bush Inaugural.
Also, the Gatlin brothers on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS. The Lone Star's